Hello and welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to explain the difference between a migrant, immigrant, emigrant, refugee, asylum seeker, and person in a refugee-like situation. Now, these terms have a lot in common as they all involve people moving from their country of origin to somewhere else. But some of these terms have legal definition and people must meet certain qualifications to be classified as such. So the most broad term of the bunch is migrant. Now, this is not a legal term and different regions of the world use this term in different ways. In the United States, this term is often used to describe seasonal agricultural workers who move between areas based on harvesting timelines. For example, where I grew up in Virginia, we grew a lot of apples. So in the fall, migrants would come from September to maybe the first week in November to harvest the apples. Then they would move south to harvest other crops. This term was also used during the Great Depression to describe people who fled the Dust Bowl of the Midwest and went to the West Coast to find work in the fields. Now, in Europe, the word migrant has a different meaning. The migrant crisis that began in 2015 was not a crisis of agricultural workers moving within a country. It was a flood of people leaving Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and various other countries in Africa and coming across the Mediterranean to primarily Greece and Italy, then moving further inland. Now, in this case, the word migrant simply meant someone who was on the move or migrating to a new location. So in Europe, the word migrant typically means the same that immigrant does in the US. So when I use the word migrant, this is the definition I mean. Now moving on, immigrant versus emigrant. An emigrant with an E is someone who leaves their country of origin, and immigrant with an I is someone who moves to a new country. So if I was born in France and lived there until I was 25 and then moved to Morocco, I emigrated with an E from France and immigrated with an I to Morocco. If you ever hear about expat or expatriate communities in places like Hong Kong, Singapore, Abu Dhabi, these are emigrant communities, people who left their countries of origin to move to a new country. So, all right, now we're going to move into the legal classifications. The 1951 Refugee Convention, also called the Geneva Convention, is a United Nations document that defines what a refugee is and how they are to be treated by other nations. Quoting the UN, a refugee is someone who has been forced to flee his or her country because of persecution, war, or violence. A refugee has a well-founded fear of persecution for reasons of race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Most likely they cannot return home or are afraid to do so, end quote. The UN Refugee Agency, also called the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, or the UNHCR, is the international agency responsible for assessing applications for refugee status, meaning they maintain the temporary camps, they resettle the refugees in host nations. A majority of refugees in 2017 came from Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Myanmar, also known as Burma. There are long-standing political or ethnic conflicts in all of these nations which meet the legal requirements from a situational standpoint. An asylum seeker is a little bit different. This is a person who arrives in a new country by any means available to them. And this is important. They do not have to come into the country by any particular way. They just have to get there. And then they must apply for asylum and go through the process of proving that they meet the legal definition of a refugee. Speaking particularly about the U.S., during the process they must live in the United States, and there are certain restrictions on their activities. For example, minors must attend school regularly. If you're interested in learning more about the asylum process in the U.S., the American Immigration Council has really well organized and easy to find information. I'll link it for you in the description below. But basically, asylum seekers are people who flee their homeland and enter a new country and must prove that they are in actuality a refugee without the help of the UN. So the final term that I want to talk about is persons in refugee-like situations. Now, according to the UNHCR, these are groups of persons who are outside their country or territory of origin and who face protection risks similar to those of refugees, but for whom refugee status has, for practical or other reasons, not been ascertained. So basically, their situation looks like a refugee situation, acts like a refugee situation, but for one reason or another hasn't yet been legally classified as such. It is important to note that in official UN reports, these groups are actually lumped together with refugees. In 2017, the largest of these groups were Venezuelans, fleeing the economic and political instability in their country. All right, that wraps up this very short vocabulary lesson. If this helped you understand the differences between the terms, please hit the like button and be sure to subscribe for more information regarding migrants and refugees in the educational system and the news. Ciao.